Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Now today I want to talk about project management. Now, do we really need project managers? I mean, what do they do? Now, according to some institutions, we're going to need over 25 million new project managers in less than 5 years' time. In which case, what's the purpose of project managers? What about AI? Will AI affect project management? And if assuming we do need project managers, well, okay, what is the actual skills needed to be a good project manager? Okay, so the first question to ask ourselves is, what's a project? Well, a project in simple terms is a temporary activity. Let's make it more clear. So, for example, building a house is a temporary activity. You build a house, once it's built, it's done. Creating maybe a computer game like GTA 6, that's a temporary activity. You build the software, you develop it, and you launch it. Of course, you have maintenance and so on, but the actual project to develop is completed. So a question that needs to be asked then, well, if we're going to need more project managers, why are there more projects now? Well, projects means new things, and the ability to do new things is really related to the cost to do new things. And what we're seeing as we move away from, if you like, physical things such as building bridges and building houses to more towards software things, change becomes cheaper and easier. And as a result of that, we're changing more often. We're changing software more often, apps more often, mobile phones more often. Now, cars are also going in this direction. Years ago, to make any updates on a diesel or gasoline car, that would be a huge effort. You'd have emission regulations and so on. Now, if it's an electric car, making updates is much easier. But those updates means temporary work, which means a project. Okay, so the question now comes, okay, so what does a project manager do? Okay, they manage a project, but what does that mean? Now, obviously, they're going to save you money if they do it well, but still, what does that mean? Well, really to understand that, I want to kind of go backwards, really to the basic principles. Now, there's always an expression that I used to like, which is that two people will do a job faster than one person, but they'll actually do it 3 times faster than one person. I like that expression. But at the same time, 5 people will do a job slower than one person if the job is meant for one person. So let me kind of go a little bit deeper again on this. Let's imagine, for example, you want an electrician. You want to do something in a house, you want some light bulbs changed, you want a simple job. You call the electrician and say, okay, change my lights for me. Little quote, little discussion, electrician comes there, changes your lights for you. Let's imagine another scenario with, say, a builder. You say, hey, I want a new wall around my house. You have a chat with him, he does some measurements and he builds the wall around your house. You need a little bit of interaction with the builder, but not too much. Now let's imagine a different scenario. Let's imagine a scenario where you want to build a new house. You got to go to an architect. You got to get the plans. You got to get permission. If you call up the builder, if you call up the electrician, if you call up the roofer and say, hey, please, can you go around to this location? The plans are there. Build me a house. What do you think would happen with all those different people? Do you ever think you'd get a house built? You wouldn't. But then the question you got to ask yourself, well, why not? Well, because they need to talk to each other, right? And to communicate with each other. But let's take that again even deeper. What does that mean? Well, really, it comes down to the type of work. And what I mean by that is that you can have some jobs, or some types of jobs, whereby it's very clear that the technical skill is needed, and the technical skill with a minimum amount of communication can do the job. But there are other types of work where it's almost unstable, where the person who needs to do their technical work has an interdependency. Sometimes there's a time interdependency, and sometimes they actually need to work with someone doing a different job, but a different discipline, in order for them to be able to complete their job correctly. For example, the electrician probably going to need to talk to the builder, the plumber is going to need to talk to various people in order to make sure your house is built efficiently. So what you have now, you have a situation where you have a complex system that's unstable, that by itself won't work. You can't call up these people and expect to have the job. Not only do you need to sort of plan and get them around the table at the beginning and tell them, okay, this is the job I want to do, talk to each other, you're probably going to need to talk to them regularly. They're probably going to need to communicate to each other regularly in order for that work to be done. And therefore, it's not enough to have the skilled person. It's not enough to have one contact with that person. And what a project manager does is he manages, or she manages, these interactions, these interfaces. They plan, they put in all the processes that are needed in order to be able to create that efficiency on what is unstable work that by itself couldn't be done. And by the skills of a project manager, They're able to get that efficiency, reduce, making sure that it's on time, it's on target, and more importantly, and most importantly, it's what it was originally planned by the customer. Okay, so we've identified projects that are so complex in nature that we know we're going to need something else. The skilled people are not enough. We need something else because they're not stable by themselves. Now, that something else is a project manager. Then what are the key skills of a project manager? Now, I'm going to give you my interpretation, and there's not really an order because it's almost like four wheels of a car. You need all of these in order to be successful. You might use one more than another on different projects, but you can need all of them. And I want to start with really a story or a real case that I came across with a project manager. So this project manager, we've got a name for this project manager, and we call them the stressinator. And they were a floor higher than us. Whenever we saw him coming down the steps, people would be bolting and trying to go to the toilet or getting away from them because they were always in a high state of stress. They felt the best way to manage the project was to put everyone else in the same state of panic that they were in when something was going wrong with their project. And as a result of this, people never wanted to go near this project manager. But there comes a big problem. And the problem is not the fact that everyone gets stressed. The problem is that this project manager made themselves unapproachable, which meant was that nobody was going to tell them there was a problem unless they couldn't hide it. And that meant that if this project manager was approachable, people might come to that project manager earlier. And they may actually reduce the risk or the issues of a project because this person would manage it in a diligent way. Of course, it might be urgent, they might put focus on the team, but not abject panic or stress on a team. And what I want to emphasize there is the importance of leadership. And I want to go a little bit more into the detail of leadership because it's a really important point of a project manager, because one of the key aspects of project management is communication. And if you're a stressinator, if the project manager is a stressinator, transferring its stress to everybody and putting them in panic, communication is going to be limited. In fact, you're going to create a stream of poor communication based on this stressinator approach. So one of the first leadership skills that come to mind to me is composure. You can keep your emotions in check because you are the barometer for the team. And if you're in stress, you'll create the rest of the team in stress. So being able to manage stress, being able to remain composed, to keep your faculties about you under stress, I think is a critical factor for a project manager. The other ones I would say is also important is conflict management. Now, conflict can also be good for the team. You know, you can bounce around ideas, but to create an environment where conflict, if you like, or technical conflict is positive, requires a lot of skill, because personal conflict, fighting amongst teams, is absolutely what you do not want. So being able to manage conflict, which again is not having managed it a lot myself, it's not an easy skill in order to get that right, but it is a very important skill for a project manager to manage conflict in leadership. And part of that then comes from building teams. Now, of course, we always recognize when you build any teams, and a project is no different, maybe even more amplified, is you have what they call the storming, right, norming and performing. Or should I say the forming, storming, norming and performing, okay? But basically what it means in a nutshell, even though I'm tongue-tying myself with this, is basically it means that when teams start off, they form up, they don't work necessarily so well together. They bump on the edges of each other. Eventually, they get to know each other. They start to normalize. They start to get a good work. And after you get that, then they perform. Now, that doesn't happen by accident. And teams can get stuck in one of the previous ones. The forming, no, of course, because once that's formed, it's formed. But they can get stuck definitely in the storming if you're not careful. And maybe from there, then they normalize, but their normalization might be of conflict, of toxic, and so on. So again, it's really important, again, for leadership skills and to understand that project managers have a role in getting these projects, which are teams, to go through those phases to get to the performance. So that's another very important leadership, which is building effective teams. It's something very important, I think, for a project manager, for a good project manager. So another really important skill for a project manager, and not in any order, is problem solving. Now, problem solving actually is a very deep skill. And if you're dealing with complex issues, it can not only be very stressful, but it also can require a lot of knowledge in terms of understanding some of the formal approaches and processes to do problem solving. And I think that's fundamental, that a project manager has a good data-driven approach and a facts approach to problem solving. Don't just go to the person with the loudest voice or go because it's the most person with the most panic. Actually look and say, okay, how do you know this? Where's your data? Things like 5 whys, fishbone analysis, all those things could be needed for a project manager in order to make a data-driven approach to problem solving. Don't just take it on face value. Go and look at the part, go and look where the issue is, understand it in detail. This is a very important skill for a project manager in understanding how to manage problems. Well, the next one for me that's important is actually the project management skill. In actually understanding what is the best practices in the industry today to do project management. What are the skills and tools out there? Whether it be the PMBOK guide, whether it be Prince2, whether you're using adaptive methodologies or frameworks, should I say, got to be careful there with things like Scrum and so on. It's really important nowadays to have a good understanding of these things. These are bodies of knowledge. These are the best ways that we've put together how to manage projects. And it's important now, especially as they become more complex, more regulatory, that the project manager has a good understanding of these best practices so they can use them where needed. Now, the other aspect as well, which is also important, is you need industry knowledge. You need to know the life cycle of the product, what the product is for and the customer is for. In this case, I like the term breadth versus depth. You don't necessarily need all the details, but you need a good breadth of the knowledge. You need to know the functions of the system, how it's working, what's the life cycle, what's the validation and testing of this system, how will it come together, what's the expectation of this. So you do need technical know-how. Going on then to the other skill, which is also very important, of course, and again, not in any order, is of course planning and strategy. Of course, planning the project and the strategies behind the project and understanding interdependencies is really critical. Of course, you're going to be continually updating your plan as things change and adapt, depending upon what type of project management profile you're using, whether it's adaptive or whether it's predictive. Adaptive being things like agile frameworks such as Scrum, or whether it's what they might consider to be the waterfall approach. And again, you need to have good understanding of how to do planning on that. And for me, the final skill that I want to discuss, and I think the most important one to be successful in all the others, and it is actually mentioned in the PMBOK guide, is trustworthiness. Now, if you're the kind of project manager that says, oh, we don't tell the customer this, or we'll put this under the rug, or we'll hide this from one team or another, you're sending a bad message to the team. And fundamentally, you're going to be damaging your project. So having integrity, being trustworthy, not accepting brushing things under the table or changing the tune to different people because it makes you look better, or knowing a status is red, but keeping it green because you don't want the fuss and you think you can solve it later, or just being downright dishonest, which can also happen. I think trustworthiness is critical. People need to know that the project manager has integrity and honesty. And I think that goes for any managing of people. And I think on top of that, what I'll also mention again, which I mentioned before, is communication. The ability to communicate, and in this case now, visual communication. In other words, being able to take maybe what might seem complex things and synthesize it down to the customers to give them the key message of where they are on the project. Not using jargon, not using long explanations, but can give concise information to customers, can help also with teams of communication. Know ways to get teams together and communicate with each other is obviously important. And in some articles I've read, whether it's true or not, they say 90% of the work of a project manager is involved in communication. It kind of makes sense in a way when you talk about interdependencies between technical people, is that they need to know what the other's doing in order to do their job effectively. So communication is a key aspect and key role. But as I said again, there's not one. That's the thing about project management. There's not just one. You need all of them. You could argue, or maybe you could put in the comments there, you could maybe argue about what you think is more important than the other, or whether you can not do one versus the other. You can discuss that. But in reality, you need them all. Of course, depending on the complexity of the project, it might stress and challenge those skills, more than one than the other. But ultimately, a project manager needs to be rounded in all those things. So going back to the fundamental question, do we need project managers? Well, I would answer the question with, I think, yes. And maybe in the next article, we'll talk about how AI is managing project management. How is it changing? How is AI changing project management? Can AI remove project managers? And that's something I'm going to discuss in the next video about the impact of AI versus project management and where we might see the future going. Maybe we don't need them anymore if we have AI, right? And another thing to leave you with, do you think project managers should start as project managers? Do you think they should start maybe as developers or engineers? Do you think you need to be a people leader before you're a project manager? Do you think the best project managers have managed people first, since it is a kind of people-facing role? What do you think about that? Put it in the comments below. It'll be really interesting to hear your views on these topics.